So I thought I would start a series. I didn't. I said it was not going to be a series, but I don't know what else to call it. It's more than one talk about the same subject, I guess, is a series. So, but I thought I would kind of redraw up some of the ideas that I shared in my book, The Complete Soul, and maybe from just a little bit different perspective. And what I would like to do today is not so much give you the answers to what is true of life, but to raise questions. It's just very important for all of us to ask questions. You know, why am I here? What is this whole thing about? And to try to answer those questions, that's a very personal thing, you know, because we have to decide why we're here, and we have to decide what we're going to do about it. And you may think, well, I'm old enough, I've been around long enough to handle that one. Thank you. I'm doing just fine, and that is fine. That's great. But it is. Are you in your 60s, 70s, 80s, or are you an eternal being? Excuse me. That's the perspective that we want to answer the questions from, is what are we? Am I a spiritual being having this human experience? And if so, what does that mean? Because most of us we've gone over the middle part of our life pretty much, haven't we? We're on the kind of coming in the home stretch. Kelly's not, but the rest of us are. Troy, he's a youngster still. But aren't we thinking about this? You know, I'm a mortal being. I have a physical body, and that physical body is not going to be here forever. It's got a few more aches and pains than it used to have, and it just seems like it's, you know, I'm not getting any younger. So it's always important for us. I think for youth it's really important, but for those of us that are getting up in years, I think it's extremely important to put everything in perspective and to ask questions. Because if I made the choice to be here, I'll probably do it again. And whatever lessons I learned or did not learn, maybe they'll be there again for me. So anyway, it's sort of like I'm interested in geology. And it's not a burning interest of mine, but we live in a pretty interesting place. They say that we were all underwater here at one point. I find that fascinating. If you go out in the desert north on 25 Road, I think it is, Beth and I were out there the other day, and there's a whole little patch of boulders, and they're half the size of your car. So how did they get there? They're just out there in the middle of nothing, you know. How did they get there? They're by a ravine, but if a flood came and carried those boulders down as far as they are into the desert, that would be one heck of a flood. So when did that happen, and how did it happen? That stuff I find very interesting. What I myself theorize is the boulders were part of the seabed, and the soil's just been washed away, and they're exposing themselves. I could be totally wrong, but some of the tops of them look like waves. You know how sand, the beaches have impressions, and some of these boulders have waves in them. So I think that's very interesting. But what do you do with that? So we were underwater 6 million years ago. There's probably not a whole lot of danger that we'll be underwater next week or anything like that. But it's still interesting. But it's information that, you know, what can you do with it? You just say, okay, that's how the place was made. And when you look at the book Cliffs, you know, you see all these layers, and, you know, layers are laid down by water and by wind, and it takes a long time to lay layers down. We've been here 18 years. I don't think there's a new layer on the book Cliffs in that short period of time. There could be one starting, or there could be one being taken away. It's a very, very slow process. But in a sense, that's how we are as spiritual beings, and thinking of these things that we're going to talk about today, that we're going to look at today, is what difference does it make, we may say. And I don't know that it makes a difference, but it is fascinating to me. I've always been interested in this kind of thing. What am I? How did I get here? If I made the decision to come here, why would I do that? And I don't know that there's an answer. But it's a very interesting question. And like geology, even if you come up with the answer and it's correct, it doesn't really change a whole lot. But it's still fascinating. And I can't think of anything more fascinating than me, my life, my own experience here. I think that's kind of how we all are. That's what we want to know. How do I solve my problems? How do I solve the issues I deal with? And that's some of what the spiritual thing is all about. So Emerson said, "Do not be deceived by dimples and curls," talking of an infant. I tell you, that babe is 1,000 years old. And what if that's true? What if the children that we're looking at are stepping on this plane once again? And it kind of throws your mind in a whole different perspective. I think I have been on this planet many times. I have no recollection whatsoever of any of those. It's just, to me, a logical thing. It's not an emotional memory thing. I've only had 2 things that happened to me in this life that could have been from a previous life that I would connect in that way, and that would be the discovery of unity, or these principles, these ideas. Felt like I'd come home when I discovered that. And the second one was when I met Beth. Felt like somehow that was a different relationship than any other I'd ever had. So I don't know if we knew each other in a previous life, but why was that feeling different? You know, what was different about it? What was different about unity? I had read many New Thought people prior to discovering unity, but when I read Emilie Cady, it was like all the lights came on. And why do things like that happen? You know, I think my own thought is that I was exposed to that type of thinking, not necessarily to Emilie Cady. Somebody said, well, maybe you were Emilie Cady. I don't know, maybe I was, but I had a major change if I was. Because she's a woman, I'm a man, and I know that these days that doesn't matter anymore, but it just, I don't know about that kind of thing. I don't know why I responded to that. Charles Fillmore thought that all people in unity were earlier members of the Christian community, the early first century Christians. He thought we're all just coming back together, you know, in this line of thought, because early Christianity was much different than what evolved later on, as I've kind of touched on that over the last several months. It was more of a metaphysical, mystical teaching. And so that's quite possible that we travel in groups, that we're drawn together out of interests. Why would I be interested in this kind of thing? You're interested in this kind of thing, but not everybody is. Why is that? I find these kinds of questions very fascinating. And it doesn't mean that we've got it figured out and they don't. That's kind of the attitude with a lot of people. I think it's kind of true that most of us have been through traditional mainstream ways of thought. We've been exposed to that and we rejected it. And we probably rejected it over a long period of time. It took us quite a while to ask these questions and figure it out. Why that, I find that so difficult. You know, the whole idea of Jesus Christ as my personal Savior, I felt a very strong obligation to affirm that, to believe that. But as I think about that, it makes no sense that one person would be sent by God as a sacrifice, would have to die, suffer, die for me, for my sins. And I'm not even sure how my sins rate. Are they worth dying for? And it's like, none of that makes sense to me. It didn't ever make sense to me, but I tried to make it make sense because I was supposed to. And so that's the kind of thing that unity has stirred in me. It's not given me so much answers as permission to ask new questions and to think of myself and others in a very different way, and particularly Jesus. I think of Jesus completely differently than I used to when I was in that line of thought. And I know how different that is when I encounter somebody that thinks that way. It's immediately clear that I feel like we're on two different planets or something, you know, when you have a discussion, and I once in a while do that. But if I don't have a discussion with somebody for a while, all you have to do is turn on the internet, go on YouTube and find a televangelist and listen for about 10 seconds, and you'll see that that's all the same. And that's not a criticism. It sounds like a criticism, but it's not really, because there's a lot of people that buy into that. They need that to comfort themselves, and that's fine. We don't want anybody to be uncomfortable. So we began our life on earth with an innate curiosity toward the world around us. It's just a natural thing to be curious. As our senses developed, we found we had a natural attraction to colorful objects and fuzzy things that squeaked when squeezed. Something got our attention. Things get the attention of our senses. We focus our senses, our vision, our hearing, on objects. And when you think about this, we become fascinated with the world around us, and whatever we brought as a baby, whatever consciousness we brought of ourselves as an eternal being, whether or not we do, and I think we do, we just don't process it in the same way. But that is gradually taken over by the colorful objects and squeaky, fuzzy things out there. We get interested in what fascinates us in the world. And our world becomes, our measure of reality becomes what we see and what we hear, what we feel, what is part of the external world. And we look in the mirror and say, I am this, I am that. I have a birthday coming up, I am hungry, I'm not feeling so well. We associate everything in our identity with the body and with the surrounding environment. And you could talk to almost any person on this planet and they'll totally get that. That's where the consciousness is. And the early metaphysicians called that race consciousness. It's the general consciousness of the whole human race. And we buy into that and say that is reality. And science is doing all the studying. They're looking at all the physical things and, you know, getting down to the atoms and the quarks and the molecules, all the little tiny things nobody sees. And they're telling us some pretty amazing things. But not one of them can tell us how life began. And that's a pretty big question. How did that happen? How did it happen that this life energy that we see floating around through animated objects, physical beings, how did that come into being? And how did that life that I am come into being? What was I before this? It's like asking the question, okay, we got the Big Bang, all started with this tiny little particle. Well, where'd that come from? What were things before that? There had to be something before it. Science tries to say time came out of that. Everything came out of that, so there was nothing before it. Well, you've got a particle. Who made that? Where'd it come from? And what we will find is one day, as I've said many times, the Big Bang Theory will seem very archaic to us at some point. That we will start understanding that we live in a field of energy that has no beginning, no end. And that's a difficult one to wrap your head around. But to me, it's not as difficult as saying everything came out of a tiny subatomic particle. That I have a great problem with. So later in life, we would gaze into the night sky and wonder where, amidst that vast expanse, we fit in. It may have been sometime later that we began to wonder how and why we came to be in this place. You've all done that. We live in a wonderful place to observe the night sky. And it doesn't happen to be Grand Junction. It happens to be areas surrounding Grand Junction. Grand Junction is no better for the night sky than any other place. The best place we ever lived in was Evergreen in terms of observing the night sky. We were up 7,600 feet, lived up there, and there were no street lights. And so you had it was almost like you could reach up and pull the stars from the sky. But who hasn't set out and looked at that and wondered, what is this? And where do I fit into all this? So we start asking those kinds of questions. And the ancients put God up in the sky. And you can understand why. It's not accessible, or it's vast. The word heaven is the idea of expansion, the great expanse. And what's being conveyed here is that God is huge. God is vast. And what we're seeing is an expression of that. And we don't understand it. We're learning as we go, of course. But we're part of something very big, and we started asking this question, and we may have tried to take that feeling that we would get from looking up into the sky and try to bring it into our religion, try to make those two things work together. And maybe we couldn't do that so well. Maybe it didn't seem to make a whole lot of sense that if God's up there, why has not Hubble seen God? It'd be interesting if they sent a photograph of the old man in the sky with sunglasses and doing his thing like the Wizard of Oz, running the whole universe. But we've not seen a picture of God. Interesting because we're looking right at it. It's hiding right out in the open. This thing we call God. All we see is an effect of that. We start thinking that way. We start putting that in perspective, and then we start thinking, well, maybe I'm part of that too. Maybe that's part of my existence. Maybe in Him I do live and move and have my being. In God, in that energy field. And I'm conscious. I'm the infinite, and I'm conscious of it. And so we start moving in that type of direction. In my own quest for understanding, Emilie Cady's illustration comparing the soul to a pail of water drawn from the ocean made a lasting impression. She focused on the composition of water, using it to suggest that the soul shares the same elements as the cosmic ocean from which it is drawn. I would say the elements of God are life, love, power, and intelligence. These are words, but they all have specific meaning and feeling behind them. But she kind of confined her use of that illustration to the elements of God, that we are created in the image and after the likeness of God. Whatever God is made of, we are that, but individualized. We're not all of that. And so I think I had a revelation one day that took it a little bit further. When a pail of water is drawn from the ocean, the age of the water remains 4.6 billion years. Did you know that is the age of water, according to science? You go buy a bottle of water, they're sitting around all over the place, 4.6 billion years old. And some scientists think even older than that. That's another question science cannot answer. Where does water come from? They say it comes from asteroids, maybe. It comes from, I don't know, I can't remember all the places they think it comes from, but nobody knows. But they know it's been around a long time. 4.6 billion years. Next time you take a drink of water, think a dinosaur probably passed this at some stage, way back. That's quite a picture to hold. I'm only saying that because that's what I read. Okay, when a pail of water is drawn from the ocean, the age of the water remains 4.6 billion years. The water in the pail does not evolve to become as old and as wise as the water in the ocean. It has never been and never will be anything less. So that got me to thinking about myself. if I'm not only created in the image and likeness of God in terms of the elements that make me up, that are my spiritual essence, but I'm ageless. I'm the same age as God. I was born 7 years coming up here pretty soon. But I stepped into this body, I believe. And whatever I am, if I am created in the image and likeness of God, I'm the same age. Think about that. You draw a pail of water out of the ocean today. You draw another pail out in 10 years. The water in 2 pails and the ocean is exactly the same age. That's our spiritual essence. It's all the same age. We're not evolving souls, we're already evolved, we're already complete. And that's part of the questioning that we engage in. We're waking up. I'm not developing my spiritual nature. I'm waking up to it. And to me, that changes the whole texture of this spiritual journey that we're on. I'm already that ageless water. I'm just in a pail. So I've been in this pail for 67 years. But I'm not the pail. And that's part of the problem that we have, getting our attention involved in things, is we have associated our identity more with the pail than with the water. We've associated more with the container, with the body, than the soul. So we're on a quest. We're trying to understand how the body works. Science does that, and they do a wonderful job of it. It's a fascinating study. But which body do I want to understand? The 50 I've had before this one? They're pretty much all the same. They have to be. But what is this thing that occupies this body? What is this I that I am? Somebody asked Thoreau what he would be when he grew up, and he said, "I'll be I." Thought he was a smart mouth. But the objective of our quest is spiritual recovery. The conscious recollection of who and what we are at the spiritual level. We're seeking a clearer understanding of how a spiritual being, equipped with a body, can best travel through this earthly experience with the deepest sense of meaning. And that's really, I think, what it comes down to, what we all eventually come to. As the Bible says, every knee shall bow, and that doesn't mean that God is going to beat us up if we don't come around. It means if we're asking questions, we all eventually wind up in the same place, asking the same question. What is this journey about? It's about remembering. And that's one of the steps of the mystical process, if you'll read Evelyn Underhill's book, Mysticism, where she examines the lives of many famous and some not so famous mystics. There's a phase they go through, they call it recollection. It's a recalling who and what they are. And that includes all of us. We don't necessarily put ourselves in that same class, but we are there. You have every right to ask who and what you are and where you came from, and you have every right to reinvent God. You have every right to rethink everything that you've been taught from a spiritual perspective. And when you claim that right, your mind begins to open up. So the spiritual journey to me has become all about recovery. Recovering something I already have. I'm that ageless water in the temporary pail. What's that mean? What's it mean to have a pail? What's it mean to be in the pail? You even leave a pail of water out on the beach, it'll eventually get back to the ocean. It cycles. It's through evaporation, through whatever, it goes back. But it never changes. It's It's always the same. And it's always the same age. And even to say water is 4.6 billion years old, that's probably not true either. Because that means it suddenly appeared one day, or not necessarily suddenly, but it appeared one day and didn't exist before. It's kind of hard to comprehend, just like to say my soul is ageless. It is. Has no beginning, no end. That's a difficult concept to grasp. And we don't have to grasp it. We just have to say, well, what if that is true? How do I behave on this planet? How do I behave with this body that I have in this pail? What's this whole thing about? Am I here as the result of forces beyond my control, or am I here by choice? Am I here to simply collect more colorful objects and things that squeak, or did I choose to come having a specific purpose in mind? And you notice this is a series of questions, not answers, because it's something we all can ask ourselves and should ask ourselves, and hopefully we are. But you think about this. Are you here as the result of what other people did, decisions they made? Is that what created your soul? Is that what brought your soul into being? And if you say, yes, that's it, I had no choice in the matter, we tend to carry that thinking into everything we do. I'm a victim. I become a victim of somebody else. So I prefer to think, I don't know what they were thinking when I was born, when my body came about. I know how it works. But I like to think that I made the decision to come. And did I make the decision to come and have all of the challenges that I'm confronted with by dipping myself out of the ocean and taking life in this pail? I don't think so. But the experience I'm having is unique to me. I didn't begin with birth. But I like to think that I made the choice to step upon this planet for whatever reason. And it's up to me to figure that out if it's necessary. I don't know if it's even necessary. I'm here. But I don't like to think that I'm the victim of what somebody else did and I just showed up. I don't have any choice. Because when you think that way, you have to say, okay, then my soul must have began with my body. That's what science says today, that our soul, our consciousness, is a product of brain function. And you didn't have a brain when you didn't have a body. So there was no you. So that's a pretty profound message. It's a very limiting message. I began as a result of choices that my parents made. Or did my parents make a choice to provide a vehicle, the pail, and dip me out of the ocean for a time? Or did I pull myself into that pail? That's what I like to think, because if that's true, then I'm here by choice. That's a very different mindset than being here as a result of action somebody else took. And so again, it just raises questions. How does a being that made the choice to be here move through this life? How do we find meaning in this? It raises questions, new questions. It's your life. It is your answer, your understanding that determines the way you approach your journey home. And the journey home isn't an end, it's a revelation of who and what we are. The home is the uncovering, the recovery of who we are as a spiritual being. So what I want to do over the next couple of weeks, next week I want to talk about religion. And I want to talk about it in a way, I can really only come from my own perspective, how religion influenced the way I think of myself as a spiritual being. Had a huge influence, and I'm having to recover from that. I'm having to recover what I believe is true from what I was taught. So I want to talk about that influence and then go through different aspects of life, how we became so associated with our outer identity, our body-based self-image, and how we can recover what is beneath that, the very foundation, that bedrock that Jesus talked about. All right? Thanks for coming out. I really appreciate you guys.
You've been watching a talk given by Reverend Doug Bottorff here at Independent Unity in beautiful Grand Junction, Colorado. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. It really helps us spread our message. If you would like to support us, you can do so by clicking the button in the right-hand corner of the video screen. We greatly appreciate your support. Thanks again for watching.